Since the beginning of time, all the matter in the universe has been governed by precisely balanced laws and constants. During an interview with Robin Collins, a philosopher with degrees in mathematics and physics, Strobel learned how these laws offer compelling evidence for a creator and conspire to make the universe habitable for life.
The laws of physics are balanced on a razor's edge for life to occur. For example, if you didn't have something like gravity that pulled matter together, you would never get planets, you wouldn't get stars, you wouldn't get any complex organisms. If you didn't have the strong nuclear force, there would be nothing to hold protons and neutrons together in the nucleus. And so you wouldn't have any atoms, so no chemistry. If you didn't have the electromagnetic force, you would have no bonding between chemicals. You would have no light, and the list goes on. So you need all these sorts of fundamental principles have to be in place in order for life to occur. Wipe out one of those principles, wipe out one of those laws, no life.
Strobel learned that life also hinges on the precise strengths and relative values of many different physical constants. One example of this fine-tuning is the force of gravity.
Imagine a ruler divided up into 1-inch increments and then stretched across the entire universe, a distance of some 14 billion light years. For the purposes of illustration, the ruler represents the possible range for gravity. In other words, the setting for the strength of gravity could have been anywhere along the ruler, but it just happens to be situated in exactly the right place so that life is possible. Now, if you were to change the force of gravity by moving the setting just 1 inch compared to the entire width of the universe, the effect on life would be catastrophic.
No large-scale life forms could exist. Anything that was more than the size of a pea would be completely crushed. So you might be able to get life of a very, very primitive sort, such as bacteria, but you could never get conscious observers.
The strength of gravity is just one of at least 30 separate parameters that must be finely tuned to produce a life-sustaining universe. Another example is the cosmological constant.
The cosmological constant describes the expansion speed of space in the universe. If space expands too quickly, then the universe will spread out so quickly that material objects can't form. So you can't get stars and galaxies and planets and the types of things that we, of course, take for granted in our universe.
Physicists have determined that the cosmological constant is fine-tuned to 1 part in 100 million billion 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 billion. Such precision has been compared to traveling hundreds of miles into space, then throwing a dart at the Earth and hitting a bullseye measuring 1/trillionth of a trillionth of an inch in diameter, an area less than the width of a single atom.
Just consider those two parameters, gravity and the cosmological constant. Their level of fine-tuning is to a precision of 1 part in 100 million trillion 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 trillion. I mean, that's like 1 atom in the entire known universe.
But what we seem to find in the universe that we know is this and this. That is, it was very uniform, and with regard to the matter, okay, it was maximum entropy. But with regard to gravitation, it was very, very special. How special was it? We can actually work this out. It's so special that the odds against the special initial state coming about by chance are less than 1 part in 10 to the power 123. So if you try to write this out 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, with this number of zeros, you'd try to put 1 0 on every particle in the observable universe, you'd be way short. So I just want to give you some feeling for how special the initial state of the universe was. And for some reason, people, they try and say, well, you don't want such and such a theory or so-and-so theory because that requires fine-tuning. But it's got to be fine-tuning. This is fine-tuning. This is incredible precision in the organization of the initial universe.
Strobel's search began with an examination of evidence that challenged materialistic theories of life's origin. He discovered that this negative evidence contradicted the textbook explanations that had once convinced him the blind forces of evolution could account for the creation and diversity of life on Earth.
A good example of negative evidence is the 1953 Origin of Life experiment by Stanley Miller, the one that helped lead me into atheism in the first place. As biologist Jonathan Wells explained to me, Miller's experiment has now been thoroughly discredited.
Stanley Miller put together a glass apparatus, and in that apparatus he put a mixture of gases that people at the time thought reflected the atmosphere of the early Earth. And those gases were methane, ammonia, hydrogen, and water vapor. But then the professional opinion of what was there on the early Earth changed. In the 60s, geochemists revised their hypothesis and decided that the hydrogen, being very light, would have escaped into outer space. The Earth's gravity isn't strong enough to hold it. And probably the early Earth's atmosphere then consisted of what we now see coming out of volcanoes today, namely carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and water vapor. Well, if the early Earth's atmosphere consisted of those gases, then Stanley Miller's experiment would not work. In fact, he himself tried it with those gases, and he found that he couldn't produce any amino acids at all. So the experiment falls apart once you use a more realistic mixture of gases in the apparatus.
Miller's test has been repeated many times using the correct atmospheric components. The results are always the same. The amino acids that generated so much enthusiasm in 1953 do not appear.
Even if Miller's experiment were valid, you're still light years away from making life. It comes down to this. No matter how many molecules you can produce with early Earth conditions, plausible conditions, you're still nowhere near producing a living cell. And here's how I know. If I take a sterile test tube and I put in it a little bit of fluid with just the right salts, just the right balance of acidity and alkalinity, just the right temperature, the perfect solution for a living cell, and I put in it one living cell, this cell is alive. It has everything it needs for life. Now I take a sterile needle and I poke that cell, and all its stuff leaks out into this test tube. You have in this nice little test tube all the molecules you need for a living cell. Not just the pieces of the molecules, but the molecules themselves. And you cannot make a living cell out of them.
The problem of biological origins has, for a very long time, I would say, has been a real deep interest to me just because of the scale of the problem, the importance of it. Where did we come from? Why are we here? All that kind of question. Probed from the point of view of natural science.
During the late 1960s and throughout the 70s and early 80s, Dean Kenyon was one of the leading chemical evolutionary theorists in the world. And like others in his field, he was trying to explain how life on Earth began through a purely natural process.
In 1969, Kenyon co-authored an important book on the origin of life.
Gary Steinman and myself thought that if we were to pull together all of the lines of empirical evidence that had accumulated by the mid to late 60s in one continuous argument, we were very enthusiastic about the possibilities for explaining the origin of the main life-building elements.
Despite his optimism, Kenyon faced a significant problem. To explain how life began, he first had to account for the origin of the essential building blocks of every cell that has existed on Earth. Large, complex molecules called proteins.
Proteins have a wide range of function in the cell, everything from structural requirements in terms of scaffolding of the cell, the cytoskeleton, to enzymes, where they're actually processing molecules to harvest energy or to build components of the cell.
Proteins do pretty much all of the jobs inside of the cell. except for storing genetic information. That's left to the DNA, the RNA. But all the day-to-day jobs, cleaning up the cell, making energy, it's all proteins.
Kenyon knew that proteins would have been as important to the first life as they are to living cells today. He also recognized the complexity of their construction.
By the 1960s, scientists had determined that even simple cells are made of thousands of different types of proteins. And the function of these molecules derives from their highly complex three-dimensional shapes. The irregular shapes of some proteins allow them to catalyze or trigger chemical reactions because of the hand-and-glove fit that they have with other molecules in the cell, while other protein molecules form interlocking structural components.
The individual parts of a bacterial motor, like this ring structure, are each made of either a single protein molecule or an assembly of proteins fitted together into a specific shape. These proteins are, in turn, made of smaller chemical units called amino acids that are linked together in long chains.
There is a very great degree of intricacy of architecture down in the cell units in these protein-forming amino acids.
In nature, 20 different types of amino acids are used to construct protein chains. Biologists have compared them to the 26 letters of the English alphabet.
Alphabetic letters can be arranged in a huge number of possible combinations, and it's the sequential arrangement of the letters that determines whether you have meaningful words and sentences. If the letters are arranged correctly, you'll get meaningful text. But if they're not arranged correctly, you'll get gibberish. And the same principle applies for amino acids and proteins.
There are at least 30,000 distinct types of proteins, each made of a different combination of the same 20 amino acids. They are arranged, like letters, to form chains, often hundreds of units long. If the amino acids are sequenced correctly, then the chain will fold into a functioning protein.
Proteins are arranged with their amino acids in such a way that the amino acids collapse on each other into an architecture that is pre-programmed by the order of the amino acids. It folds into a certain structure, and that structure can do a certain function. So all proteins in the cell have a certain three-dimensional pattern that's based on the arrangement of amino acids in the chain.
This arrangement is critical, for if the amino acids are incorrectly sequenced, a useless chain forms, and instead of folding into a protein, it will be destroyed in the cell.
Proteins, like written languages or computer codes, have a high degree of specificity. The function of the whole depends upon the precise arrangement of the individual parts.
Back in the days of Charles Darwin, relatively little was known about the complexity, the enormous complexity of the microscopic world, the microscopic aspects of living organisms. There was a view that in the latter part of the 19th century that a living cell was essentially a featureless bag of enzymes, all kind of in true solution. Not much in the way of detailed three-dimensional complexity. But of course in the 20th century we've made enormous strides in understanding that that's not the case at all. There is a very great degree of intricacy of architecture down in these cell units. So today everybody understands about bits and bytes, and so perhaps a useful illustration there of the complexity, let's say, of the DNA molecules might be helpful. You can calculate the number of bits contained in tightly packed DNA material, let's say, that would fill 1 cubic millimeter of space, as equaling 1.9 times 10 to the 18th power bits. Now that number is by many orders of magnitude vastly greater than the storage capacity of the largest computing machines that we have, the supercomputing machines. Their storage capacity per cubic millimeter is far less than the information storage capacity in in the DNA molecule. Now, moreover, the DNA itself, as it functions in a living cell, has about 100 different proteins involved with just its own functioning. And then you have these tens of thousands of other proteins in the rest of the living cell also involved. So we have now a picture of immense submicroscopic complexity, and so no longer is a reasonable proposition to think that simple chemical events could have any chance at all to generate the kind of complexity that we see in the very simplest living organism. So we have not the slightest chance of a chemical evolutionary origin for even the simplest of cells now, with the new knowledge that's accumulated in this century.
In living cells today, chains of amino acids are not formed directly by forces of attraction between their parts, the scenario Kenyon envisioned on the early Earth. Instead, another large molecule within the cell stores instructions for sequencing the amino acids in proteins. It is called DNA.
Initially, Kenyon believed that proteins could have formed directly from amino acids without any DNA assembly instructions. And that's why so many scientists were excited about his theory. But the more he and others learned about the properties of amino acids and proteins, the more he began to doubt that proteins could self-assemble without DNA.
In DNA, Kenyon encountered a molecule with a property he could not explain through natural processes. For locked securely within its double helix structure is a wealth of information in the form of precisely sequenced chemicals that scientists represent with the letters A, C, T, and G. In a written language, information is communicated by a precise arrangement of letters. In the same way, the instructions necessary to assemble amino acids into proteins are conveyed by the sequences of chemicals arranged along the spine of the DNA. This chemical code has been called the language of life, and it is the most densely packed and elaborately detailed assembly of information in the known universe.
Like other scientists working on the origin of life, Kenyon realized he had two choices. Either he had to explain where these genetic assembly instructions came from, or he had to explain how proteins could have arisen directly from amino acids without DNA in the primordial oceans. And in the end, he realized he could do neither.
It's an enormous problem how you could get together in one tiny submicroscopic volume of the primitive ocean all of the hundreds of different molecular components you would need in order for a self-replicating cycle to be established. And so my doubts about whether amino acids could order themselves into meaningful biological sequences on their own without pre-existing genetic material being present just reached, I guess for me, the intellectual breaking point sometime near the end of the decade of the 70s.
As Kenyon reevaluated his theory, new biochemical discoveries further weakened his conviction that amino acids could have organized themselves into proteins.
The more I conducted my own studies, including a period of time at NASA Ames Research Center, the more it became apparent that there were multiple difficulties with the chemical evolution account. And further experimental work showed that amino acids do not have the ability to order themselves into any biologically meaningful sequences.
example of a genetic mutation or an evolutionary process which can be seen to increase the information in the genome?
Can you just stop when I think?
The existence of complex biological machines raises an obvious question. If natural selection wasn't the agent of their construction, then what was? The centerpiece of my investigation was an interview with philosopher of science, Dr. Stephen Meyer. Meyer, who holds a PhD from Cambridge University, brought me face to face with the most efficient information processing system in the universe. The DNA molecule and its language of life.
The discovery of the information-bearing properties of DNA and RNA is a fundamental challenge to all materialistic theories of the origin of life. Neo-Darwinism and its associated theories of chemical evolution and the like will not be able to survive the biology of the information age, the biology of the 21st century.
Meyer's conclusions are based upon his understanding of the DNA molecule and the genetic instructions that are locked within the nucleus of living cells.
In 1953, when Watson and Crick elucidated the structure of the DNA molecule, they discovered that DNA was a carrier of genetic information in the form of a 4-character digital code. That is to say that DNA functions like a software program, only more complex than anyone has ever created or devised. For a biological system to run and operate, it needs genetic information to build the proteins and protein machines that cause the cells to maintain their function.
This information is stored in a precise arrangement of 4 chemicals that scientists represent with the letters A, C, T, and G. Sequences of these chemicals provide the instructions necessary to assemble complex protein molecules that in turn help form structures as diverse as eyes, legs, wings, and hearts. This code has been called the language of life, and it is the most densely packed and elaborately detailed assembly of information in the known universe.
Geneticist Michael Denton has estimated that the amount of biological information necessary to build all of the proteins in all of the species of organisms that have ever existed on planet Earth could be held in a single teaspoon. And we'd still have room left over for all of the information contained in every book ever written. The more I learned about DNA, the more I understood the significance of what Stephen Meyer called the most fundamental question facing biology today. Where did the information in DNA come from? How did it arise in the first place?
Well, lots of people have wanted to explain the origin of information by reference to the laws of physics and chemistry or by reference to the chemical properties of the constituent parts of the DNA. But that would be like saying that you could explain the information in this morning's New York Times headline by reference to the physics and chemistry of ink bonding to paper. There is a chemical explanation as to why the ink sticks to the paper, but that does not explain the way the ink got arranged to convey a message that could be understood by speakers of the English language. Information requires a material medium, but it transcends the material medium.
An explanation for the origin of the genetic instructions needed to build the first life is the holy grail of 21st century biology. Theories proposing that this information arose through natural selection acting upon non-living molecules or the self-organizing power of chemicals in a primordial soup have repeatedly failed. Even time and blind chance, the oft-invoked saviors of implausible biological scenarios, have fallen far short as accounts for the source of the instructions in DNA. Mathematicians, for example, have calculated that a universe filled with monkeys, typing relentlessly throughout the oldest estimated age of the cosmos, would have no realistic chance of producing Shakespeare's play Hamlet, let alone a transcript of the genetic information required to build even the simplest living cell.
Based on our uniform and repeated experience, which is the basis of all scientific reasoning about the past, there is only one known cause for the origin of information, and that cause is intelligence. Whether we're looking at a hieroglyphic inscription, a section of text in a book, or a computer software, if you have information and you trace it back to its source, invariably you come to an intelligence. Therefore, when you find information inscribed along the backbone of the DNA molecule in the cell, the most rational inference, based on our repeated experience, is that an intelligence of some kind played a role in the origin of that information.
Nothing about DNA has helped with the evolution theory at all. DNA, which stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, is the most complex molecule in the universe. Unbelievably complicated molecule. That little DNA molecule, average person has 50 trillion cells in their body with 46 of those little molecules in each cell. 46 chromosome strands in each cell of your body. If you extracted all of it, it would only fill about 2 tablespoons. But if you took those DNA strands and unwound them, stretched them out, tied them together, one person's DNA would reach from Earth to the moon and back over 500,000 times. Round trips to the moon. They say the DNA holds more information than all computer programs ever written by man combined. IBM models the newest computers after DNA. The quantity of information is so vast, we have to invent new numbers to measure it. Not terabytes, petabytes, or exabytes, yottabytes, and zettabytes. All the words uttered by everyone who ever lived would amount to 5 exabytes. And your DNA and your chromosome holds more information than that. It is so unbelievably complex. If you typed out the code found in your DNA, when you got done typing, you'd have enough books to fill Grand Canyon 78 times. That's the instructions to make you. I'd say you're pretty special. Quite a list of instructions to make you. David said, I will praise thee, for I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. And he didn't have a microscope, and he could figure that out. Yeah. You know, from conception to birth, the baby adds 15,000 cells per minute to its body. Each one is more complicated than a space shuttle. How would you like to be in charge of the supply end of supplying a factory that is producing 15,000 space shuttles a minute? And it's your job to make sure they have all the nuts and bolts and screws and everything they need to put that thing together. Some of you women are saying, boy, I did it, and that's hard too. Sometimes they want pickles in the middle of the night, you know. What are you building down there anyway, you know? The probability of one DNA happening by chance has been calculated to be 1 in 10 to the 119,000th power. That's a big number when you figure the entire visible universe is about 10 to the 28 inches in diameter. DNA has not proven anything that would help the evolution theory. It's been made the problem much, much,
Most of our DNA is a jumble from all our ancestors. It's what makes each of us unique. But there's a section of our genetic code that stays almost constant. The Y chromosome, the special piece of DNA that only men have. It's passed virtually unchanged from father to son, like a family name.
The Y chromosome links the men of today with the men who lived in the past. This tiny piece of DNA allows us to travel back in time through humanity's history.
These days, we use DNA to test whether a man is the biological father of a child. Could it really link the billions of men alive today back to one ancestor? Wells believes the answer is yes. That the Y chromosome can trace the origins of men from all over the world. From Africa to America, all the branches on the tree join up in one trunk. The Y chromosome links men today back to their common ancestors. The key is to reveal super ancestors, men who left their genetic imprint on huge numbers. They're like branching points, where vast sections of the tree come together in a single man. Geneticists can trace them further and further back down the tree to the ultimate super ancestor, scientific Adam. This is a scientific quest, yet the idea behind our search was first written down in a document of faith, the Bible. Thousands of years before genetics, the book of Genesis tells of one man who fathered us all. The Bible gives no physical description of Adam, saying only that he's created out of dust in God's image. Adam's rib provides the raw material for the first woman, Eve. God gives them a home, the Garden of Eden. But soon, tempted by a serpent, Adam and Eve eat from the tree of knowledge and are cast out of paradise. Adam and Eve have children, and according to the Bible, this one family has grown to include everyone on earth today. Even though the Y chromosomes come from all over the world, they almost all have something in common. A particular mutation that scientists call M168. In fact, men all over the planet share this mutation. Genghis Khan and the San Francisco Mongolians have it. Thomas Jefferson has it. Wells himself has it. Nearly 3 billion men share this mutation. And it means they're all descended from one man. It's a staggering thought. Genghis Khan could have fathered millions, but the man who first had this genetic mutation had billions of descendants. We're near the bottom of the tree. Could this man, M168, be Adam? There's only one problem. On the Kenyan island of Pate, Spencer Wells found one man who doesn't fit. His Y chromosome doesn't have the critical mutation. It's a crucial clue. And he's not the only one. There are others who are not descended from M168. So he can't be Adam. M168 is far down the tree, but not its base. And the Y chromosome from the odd man out on Pate gives us the final piece of our puzzle. The man's lineage originates in East or South Africa. Comparing this Y chromosome to thousands of men from all over the world reveals a critical discovery. These mutations, originating in Africa, appear on every Y chromosome in every man in the world today. These are the universal mutations we've been looking for. We followed the DNA trail all the way to the bottom of the tree. Every branch leads to one man, one Y chromosome. There must have been one man who gave rise to all men alive today. He is the ultimate super ancestor. He is Scientific Adam. One of his descendants was M168. He was the forefather of the ancient Middle Eastern ancestor of Thomas Jefferson. He gave rise to Genghis Khan's Y chromosome. In fact, all the Y chromosomes in the world trace back to this one African man. He is Scientific Adam. Wells believes the pattern of African Y chromosomes puts his birthplace somewhere in the Great Rift Valley region of East Africa, perhaps Tanzania or Ethiopia. He thinks this is Scientific Adam's homeland, his Garden of Eden. Genetics can date the ancient Y chromosome mutations to calculate the age of Scientific Adam. Wells believes he was born around 60,000 years ago. It sounds ancient, but it means our search for a common ancestor has not led us all the way back to a time of ape men, or even to primitive beings like Homo erectus. Compared to the billions of years of human evolution, we've found Adam in the recent past. Science can't tell for sure what set Adam apart. There were other men who lived alongside him. But over the centuries, all the other men's lines died out. Maybe some had only daughters, or no children at all. Their Y chromosomes were lost forever. Only Adam's lineage survives. Here's how Adam could have become our ultimate super ancestor. Sometime around 60,000 years ago, Adam is born. He's a fast learner, and in time, he proves himself as a leader of his tribe. His command of language sets him apart. Perhaps he invents new and more lethal weapons, or takes charge of the hunts, devising new strategies. He's much better than the other guys at providing for his family and the tribe. And this makes him popular with the ladies. He has more children than the others. His sons inherit not just his smarts, but of course his Y chromosome.
Mitochondrial DNA is different. It's found outside the nucleus of the cell, where there are hundreds of little energy-producing components called mitochondria. Each of these mitochondria contains a circular strand of DNA that's contributed exclusively by the mother. Because mitochondrial DNA remains relatively unchanged, it can be used to trace a person's lineage back for thousands of years, and perhaps even to the beginning of time. The uproar about mitochondrial DNA really began back in 1987 when a study was conducted by researchers at UC Berkeley which compared the mitochondrial DNA of 147 people from 5 of the world's geographic locations. Based on the results of the study, researchers concluded that all of the 147 people had the same female ancestor, an individual that's become known as the mitochondrial Eve.
Do these findings actually prove the biblical story of Adam and Eve? Or is there another explanation, one that's more in line with the theory of evolution?
The mitochondrial DNA evidence can mean one of two things. In the beginning, there really was one set of parents, which would mean that mitochondrial Eve could be the biblical Eve. or all modern humans are descended from a very small population of humans that existed at one time. Evolutionists theorize that the original group of humans contained more than one woman, so it had several sources for mitochondrial DNA. However, the DNA for all but one of the sources became extinct when subsequent generations failed to produce any female offspring. Therefore, the mitochondrial Eve is simply the one and only female of the original population whose offspring have provided a continuous supply of female descendants. The mitochondrial Eve evidence does not force the belief that there was only one woman from whom we all descended, but, and this is very important, it is most definitely consistent with it. And of course, this is something that evolutionists never expected they'd have to deal with. So in order to explain away the possibility of the biblical Eve, they've had to come up with a very far-fetched explanation about mitochondrial Eve. Their explanation is that her family somehow spread across the globe and replaced all the other archaic humans, who just happened to have failed in their efforts to produce human female offspring. Now that's pretty hard to swallow.
The news that mitochondrial DNA might prove the existence, or at least the possibility, of the biblical Eve sent shockwaves through the scientific community. How could all humans be descended from one individual if our species was supposedly evolving all over the world?
This has never been done. No one have been in the area at all with a remote control camera.
The robotic camera's survey revealed many shapes and objects familiar to Muller, including coral formations with right angles, arches, discs, and straight shafts fused into larger masses that had the appearance of twisted wreckage.
Now, when we have been able to go back and forth with a remote control camera, we can repeatedly see that these strange structures we are looking for are there. Not at one place, but you see them again and again and again. There are situations where you see something that looks like an axle, a hub, something that looks like a wheel, and you say to yourself, this is not a coral reef, this is a coral growth on an artifact. And that is what's different to me when I compare corals at other locations around the world.
Since the earliest explorations at Nueva, one distinctive type of formation has often been identified on the sea floor. A slender, table-like structure, sometimes standing on end, with a coral-encrusted base, a straight shaft, and a circular top.
It's a 90-degree angle, a right angle, between something that looks like an axle and the wheel. And you can see this in different varieties, and it looks very different from normal coral growth. And it is like a man-made structure with a coral growth on it.
In the midst of them, Pan Tien photographed this circular object attached to what appears to have been a broken axle or hub. This discovery was significant for two reasons. Pan Tien had documented the coral-encrusted form of a wheel with dimensions similar to ancient Egyptian artifacts directly across from the proposed Nueva crossing site. Her find also provided independent confirmation of earlier evidence establishing wheel-like formations on both coasts of the Red Sea in accordance with descriptions in the biblical record.
And the Lord looked down on the Egyptian army, and he made the wheels of their chariots come off.
The Bible describes the attack on Jericho in the 6th chapter of Joshua and in the book of Judges. Years ago, some archaeologists said the attack on Jericho never really happened. All the liberal books were filled with things like, you don't have to accept Jericho as an actual fact of history. It was just a Hebrew myth. Then, archaeologist John Garstang did the unthinkable and unforgivable. He dug up Jericho. Now, what did God say, and what did Garstang find?
And the Lord said to Joshua, See, I have given Jericho into your hand, its king and all the mighty men who are in the city.
We know that Jericho had many thousands of inhabitants. We know its walls were 45 feet high and in some places in excess of 20 feet thick. It was unassailable, except by siege. You couldn't get in. Archaeologist Bryant Wood
Very
explains.
strongly fortified. Archaeologists have found that there was a great earthen embankment around the city, and at the base of the embankment there was a retaining wall about 15 feet high. On top of that, a mud brick wall about 20 feet high, and then at the crest of that embankment, another mud brick wall about 20 feet high. So it was very strongly defended, exactly as the Bible says.
The walls were not breached. The gates were not knocked in. When Garstang got to the walls, they had fallen to the ground. He said, it was as if some gigantic hand had come down out of heaven and gone around the walls with his finger, like a sandcastle on the beach. The Bible also says in Joshua 6, verse 20, that the Israelites went up into the city. Archaeological evidence shows there were ramparts around the city, mounds of earth. When the walls fell out, they fell onto the mounds of earth, so that the Israelites had to go up over the walls to attack.
We now know from the archaeological findings that they had to go up this rampart. And so, again, it's very accurately portrayed in the Bible.
Jericho is a classic illustration of fulfilled prophecy. Garstang wrote, there remains no doubt. The walls fell outwards so completely that the attackers would be able to clamber up and over their ruins into the city. Archaeological evidence shows Jericho was destroyed by fire around 1400 BC. A date which corresponds to the end of the Israelites' 40-year exodus in the desert after leaving Egypt.
The Bible says the Israelites burned Jericho, and all the excavators there have found evidence for this great burning that took place, a thick layer of ash about 3 feet thick all over the city, showing that a great fire destroyed the city. All of these things agree exactly with what the Bible tells us.
But here's how it works with cynics and critics. Archaeologist Kathleen Kenyon dug at this site and said her evidence disproved the Bible's account. But as Dr. Wood explains, far from disproving the Bible, Kenyon's own evidence backs up Garstang's findings.
I've done a lot of research on Jericho, and I've examined all of the pottery excavated by Garstang, excavated by Kathleen Kenyon, and it does indeed date to about 1400 BC. And so I believe Garstang had that date correct, and Kathleen Kenyon was wrong in her dating. At the base of the rampart that surrounded the city, she found a pile of fallen bricks from the city walls, which were made of mud bricks. Earlier excavations by the Germans in the first part of the 20th century, around 1907, 1908, found exactly the same thing at several points around the city walls. And more recently, an Italian team has been working there in the late 1990s, and they've also found a great pile of bricks deposited at the base of the tell from the city walls that had collapsed and slid down the rampart and were deposited there at the base of the tell. So we have very good evidence that, yes, the walls of Jericho fell just as the Bible tells us.
The Bible says the Israelites attacked Jericho in the spring of the year, and archaeological proof shows that's exactly what happened.
One of the most unique finds at Jericho were great jars, clay jars full of grain. Nearly every building excavated had these large jars full of grain. Now normally, if a city's defeated by a conquering king, he would plunder the city and remove that grain. It was valuable, good for food, it could be bartered, it was like money. The Egyptians record in great detail the amounts of grain that they plundered from the cities they conquered. But here at Jericho, it was left there. Well, if you read the biblical story carefully, you see that the Israelites were commanded not to plunder Jericho. And so this is a proof that they obeyed the Lord. In this case, they did not plunder the city. It's very unique. In no other excavation have we found such a large amount of grain. It also tells us that the siege of the city was very short. Normally, to take a well-defended city such as Jericho would take months, sometimes even years. But the people there never ate up the grain. The jars were full. And so, again, this agrees with the Bible because it tells us the Israelites marched around Jericho 7 days. Then the walls fell and they captured the city. Another interesting thing about the grain is it shows us the harvest had just been taken in because all of these jars were full, and many of them in all of the buildings. And again, that agrees with the Bible because when the Israelites crossed the Jordan River, we're told it was at flood stage because it was harvest time. And so all of these factors indicate the accuracy of the biblical account of this particular story.
여호와는 광대하시도다 그 거룩한 하나님 성에서 찬양할지어다 주 승리 우리에게 주셨도다 모든 원수 물리치셨네 엎드려 절하세 우리 주
Abraham, I am your God, and I will make my covenant between me and you. No longer shall your name be Abram, man of greatness, but Abraham, father of nations. For I will make you the father of multitudes. Kings shall come from you. As for Sarai, your wife, you shall no longer call her Sarai, the princess, but Sarah.
나의 가는 길 주님 인도하시네 그는 보이지 않아도 날 위해 일하시네 주 내 인도자 항상 함께 하시네 그 사랑과 힘 베푸시며 인도하시네 광야의 길을 만드시고 날 인도해 사막에 강 만드신 것 보라 하늘과 땅 편에도 주의 말씀 영원히 내 삶 속에 새 일 행하리 나의 가는 길 주님 인도하시네 그는 보이지 않아도 날 위해 일하시네 주 내 인도자 항상 함께 하시네. 그 사랑과 힘 베푸시며 인도하시네. 광야의 길을 만드시고 나를 인도해. 사막에 강 만드신 것 보라. 하늘과 땅 변해도 주의 말씀 영원히 내 삶 속에 새 일 행하리. 나의 가는 길 주님 인도하시네. 그는 보이지 않아도 날 위해 일하시네. 주의 인도자 항상 함께 하시네. 그 사랑과 힘 베푸시며.
They have no more wine.
What wilt thou have me to do for thee, that will I do. For mine hour is not yet come.
This is my destiny. This is my hope eternal. To be conformed into the image of love. This is my purpose. This is my highest calling. To leave the world behind and live my life for you. Carry me, hide me in the shelter of your pure embrace. The place where I belong, oh Jesus, cover me. I come to you for shelter, to the secret place where I live to see your face.
나의 부르심, 나의 영원한 소망, 예수님의 영상을 담는 것. 나의 목적, 나의 높은 부르심, 세상을 뒤로하고 주 위에 사는 것. 덮으소서 주 거룩한 꿈에 품을 소서. 이곳이나 속한 곳도 예수 이끄소서. 주 얼굴 보기 위해 은밀한 곳으로 내가 나아갑니다. 나의 부르심, 나의 영원한 소망, 예수님의 영상을 담는 것. 나의 목적, 나의 높은 부르심, 세상을 뒤로하고 주 위에 사는 것. 덮으소서 주 거룩한 꿈에 품을 소서. 이곳이나 속한 곳도 예수 이끄소서. 주 얼굴 보기 위해 은밀한 곳으로 내가 나아갑니다. 덮으소서
AD 70년 로마에 의해 멸망당한 뒤 지구상에서 사라졌던 나라. 그 이후 1900년 동안 모진 고난과 핍박, 박해 속에 유랑생활을 했던 이스라엘은 1948년 독립국가를 재건했다. 1900년 만에 이루어진 기적 같은 독립. 인류 역사상 유례를 찾아볼 수 없는 이스라엘의 이 같은 역사를 세상은 기적이라 했다. 과연 무엇이 이스라엘의 독립을 가능케 했던 것일까? 시장하셨던 예수님은 무화과 나무에서 열매를 찾으셨다. 그러나 예수님이 열매를 구하신 때는 무화과가 맺힐 때가 아니었다. 그럼에도 불구하고 예수님은 열매가 없다는 이유로 무화과 나무를 저주하셨다. 예수님의 저주로 인해 말라 죽은 무화과 나무. 이 사건을 통해 예수님은 무엇을 말해주고자 하셨던 것일까? 성경에서는 불순종하는 이스라엘을 악하여 먹을 수 없는 무화과 나무로 비유하고 있다. 3년 동안 복음을 전하시며 열매를 구하셨던 예수님. 그러나 이스라엘은 예수님의 말씀에 순종치 않았다. 예수님이 무화과 나무를 저주해 말라 죽게 한 사건은 이 같은 이스라엘이 멸망하게 될 것이라는 예언이었다. 예수님의 예언이 있은 지 40년 후 무화과 나무가 말라 죽었듯 이스라엘은 로마에 의해 멸망당했다. 당시 이스라엘의 멸망을 똑똑히 지켜보았던 유대 역사가 요세푸스는 그날의 참상을 이렇게 전하고 있다.
성에서 외출하는 길이 단절되면서 기근이 더욱 심해졌다. 안전의 희망은 끊어졌고 집마다 가족마다 배고픔을 참지 못해 사람을 먹는 끔찍한 일이 발생했다. 실내와 성의 소로에는 온통 어린이와 노인의 시체들, 그리고 죽어가는 여자들로 가득했다.
예수님의 예언에 따라 멸망된 이스라엘. 그 후 1900년 동안 이스라엘 땅은 이방인들에게 짓밟혔고 유대민족은 세계 도처로 뿔뿔이 흩어지게 됐다. 그러나 1948년 이스라엘은 영국의 지배를 끝으로 독립을 선포했다. 전 세계에 뿔뿔이 흩어져 살던 민족이 1900년 만에 잃었던 나라를 다시 찾은 것이다.
종교인이건 비종교인이건 간에 이스라엘의 독립은 기적이다 얘기를 합니다.
세계 역사상에 한 나라가 망해서 없어졌다가 2000년 만에 조국을 광복한 예가 없습니다.
수많은 사람들은 이스라엘의 독립을 기적이라 했다. 그도 그럴 것이 잃었던 나라를 1900년 만에 다시 세운다는 것은 인류 역사상 유일무이한 이스라엘만의 역사였기 때문이다. 그러나 성경에는 이미 이스라엘의 독립이 예언돼 있었다. 1939년 독일이 폴란드를 침공하면서 제2차 세계대전이 일어났다. 2차 세계대전을 통해 인류 역사에는 전무후무한 대참극이 기록돼진다. (1933년) 독일의 새 총통으로 선출된 독일 나치당의 아돌프 히틀러. 히틀러는 1차 세계대전 패전 이후 굴욕감과 수치감에 침체됐던 독일 사회 분위기를 제국주의 야심을 이용해 전환시켜 나갔다.
Heute weiß es das ganze Volk. Unser Wille war härter als die deutsche Not. Nach 15-jähriger Verzweiflung hat ein großes Volk wieder Tritt gefasst.
제국주의 야심을 키우기 위해서는 결정적으로 국민의 힘이 모아져야 했는데 히틀러는 이를 위해 독일 민족만의 우월성을 내세운 민족주의 정책을 내세웠다.
무슨 말이냐면은 게르만 민족은 하늘로부터 선택된 백성이다. 다른 모든 민족은 게르만 민족을 위해서 존재한다.
히틀러가 주창한 민족주의 정책의 파급 효과는 실로 무섭게 번져나갔다. 독일인들은 오로지 독일 게르만 민족만을 생각하게 됐고 다른 모든 민족을 척결 대상으로 삼았다. 특히 그 중에서도 유대인들은 지구상에서 씨를 말려야 할 존재로 치부됐다.
Dann wird das Ergebnis nicht die Bolschewisierung der Erde und damit der Sieg des Judentums sein, sondern die Vernichtung der jüdischen Rasse in Europa.
2차 세계대전이 극점으로 치달으면서 독일은 전쟁에서 밀리기 시작했다. 이때 개토에 갇혀있던 유대인들은 짐승처럼 기차에 실렸다. 기차 안은 숨이 막힐 듯 찜통처럼 더웠고 견디기 힘든 악취가 코를 찔렀다.
Somebody was screaming that somebody died or something, and they still didn't open the doors. So it was just a horrible trip that I want to forget. I can't. I don't want to forget, but I want to forget.
Thousands of people were pouring out of this train. The train had no end. I couldn't see the end of it. And there was tremendous chaos. Children looking for parents and mothers calling their children's names. It was impossible to find anybody.
기차의 선로가 끝나는 곳. 그곳은 아우슈비츠 학살 수용소였다. 2차 세계대전이 남긴 인류 역사상 전무후무한 대참극은 바로 이곳에서 이루어졌다.
Nobody. And then you see all the strong people on top and all the weak people on the bottom. And the strong ones on the top, he says, they have stomachs full of air or something. You see people that scratched on the walls because they want to get on top of each other. The last death fight, you know, the fight for against the death.
독일이 패망하여 끝이 난 2차 세계대전의 종전과 함께 유대민족의 대학살도 끝났다. 연합군이 아우슈비츠를 점령했을 때 온 세계는 경악을 금치 못했다. 산자와 죽은 자가 구분되지 않는 처참한 현실. 이곳에서 유대인들은 무려 7년 동안 갇혀 있었다.
The hand of the Lord was upon me. He brought me out by the Spirit of the Lord and set me in the middle of a valley. It was full of bones. He led me back and forth among them, and I saw a great many bones on the floor of the valley. He asked me, "Son of man, can these bones live?" I said, "O sovereign Lord, you alone know." Then he said to me, "Prophesy to these bones and say to them, dry bones, hear the voice of the Lord. I will make breath into you, and you will come to life. Then you will know that I am the Lord." So I prophesied as I was commanded, and as I was prophesying, there was a noise, a rattling sound, and the bones came together, bone to bone. I looked, and tendons and flesh appeared on them, and skin covered them, but there was no breath in them. Then he said to me, "Prophesy to the breath, and say to it, come from the four winds, O breath, and breathe into these slain that they may live." So I prophesied as he commanded me, and breath entered them. They came to life and stood up on their feet, a vast army.
(1947년 11월 29일) 팔레스타인 내 이스라엘 자치국가 건설 문제는 유엔 총회에 상정됐다. 당시 이스라엘의 독립을 결사적으로 반대하며 일치단결한 아랍국들은 자신들이 가지고 있던 석유 이권을 내세우며 유엔 총회에 참석한 국가들을 압박했다. 이스라엘의 독립을 지원할 경우 석유에 관한 이권 접근이 끊어질 수 있는 상황. 유엔 총회에 참석한 국가들은 굳이 아랍과의 사이가 멀어지면서까지 이스라엘의 독립을 승인할 필요가 없었다.
Afghanistan, no. Argentina, abstention. Soviet Union, yes. United Kingdom, abstain. United States, yes.
יהודים בכל העולם עצרו את נשימתם. רתוקים למקלטי הרדיו.
찬성 33, 반대 13. 유엔은 개표 결과에 따라 이스라엘 독립을 승인합니다.
찬성 33, 반대 13. 그 누구도 예측하지 못했던 결과였다. 그러나 결과는 이스라엘의 승리였다.
Fallen daughter, for her devastated father, for the prodigal who's dying in a strange new way, for the child who's always hungry, for the patriot with no country. Through the years you made it clear that the time of Christ was near. Though the people couldn't see what Messiah ought to be, though your word contained a plan, they just could not understand that your most awesome work was done through the frailty of your Son. El Shaddai, El Shaddai, El Elyon Adonai. Age to age, you're still the same by the power of the name El Shaddai, El Shaddai.
형은 하모니카를 분다.
1990년대 초반 서러움을 안다고 30이라는 그 나이에 나는 영화라는 것을 꿈꾸었습니다. 중고 비디오 카메라를 겨우 구해서 한 줌 햇살 같은 남루한 풍경들만 찍고 다녔죠. 무엇을 찍어야 할지 그 어디에서도 배운 적이 없어서 꼭 나처럼 변방을 떠도는 풍경들만 담으며 다녔습니다. 그 길 위에서 이 떠돌이 들깨와 운명적으로 좋아하게 되었습니다.
왜 다 찍냐?
다니는 교회 앞에서 담배를 피는 도발적인 자태.
내가 찍어도 돼? 얼굴?
마음대로 해. 마음대로.
재환아.
너왜
녀석은 꼭 자기를 닮은 후미진 풍경들을 많이 알고 있었습니다.
너 또 담배냐? 너는 뭐 매일 담배만 펴? 어?
30 넘어서 갈 일이 없고 이걸 담배가 피다가 죽을래.
담배나 피다 죽으려고?
30 넘어 할 일이 없다는 그 말이 내 이야기인 양 명치 끝을 찔렀습니다.
내 얼굴이 새까맣구만. 뭉클하고 내가 지금은 말한 나의 기억가 수수타 있을까? 별로 없을 것 같다.
나 있잖아.
죽지도 않을겨. 이거 버렸으니까 이제부터 저를 지금
재환아. 넌 왜 이렇게 변두리만 쏘다니냐?
내 취미다.
취미야?
내 좋잖아. 어때? 뭘 허가할 수 없고 그러니까 좋지.
뭐라고 하는 사람이 없어?
켜도 점화되지 않는 라이터처럼 재환이의 청춘은 서글프고 막막합니다.
그리고 이렇게 쏟아져야
세월이 빨리 가지.
세월이?
재환이를 따라 툰드라처럼 음습하고 눅진한 풍경들을 참 많이 쏘다녔습니다. 그 중에서 가장 기억나는 것이 목동 천변의 갈대밭.
왜? 누워보라고? 좋아?
하늘이 다 보여.
하늘이?
너봐, 좋아.
그래, 누워보자.
하늘이 다 보여. 그것은 예언이었습니다. 그날 나는 진정 밑바닥에 누움으로 드넓은 하늘의 풍경을 보기 시작한 것이지요.
그만 가. 이렇게 누워있어. 이 세상에 가만 혼자 것 같아. 바람 소리만 밀고.
버려진 볼 하나 베개를 삼고 텅 빈 하늘을
여전히 세상은 허무하고 허기지고 아팠습니다. 그런 재환이를 담으며 나 또한 서럽고 많이 울었습니다. 그것이 우리의 영화였습니다.
돌아갈 길이 없기 마음에 머무는 내 지난 이야기들이 눈물로 흘렀습니다. 차디찬 돌베개 뜨거운 눈물에 젖을 때 들리던 그 음성.
장영이 라디오를 켜고 신나게 골목길로 갑니다. 거의 보이지 않는 눈으로 무언가를 찾네요.
이거구나.
재환이가 쓴 시들을 찾는 겁니다.
즐겁다 떠돌이 생활. 그래서 저녁 하늘이 붉구나.
재환이는 담벼락만 아니라 전봇대, 땅바닥, 풀잎에도 시를 써놓았습니다. 그걸 찾아내고 즐기는 유일한 독자는 창영입니다.
그런 글이 말이 없네.
6월의 하늘은 서로 말이 없고 사는 세상에 그 쓸쓸함.
창영이 떠나버린 빈 골목에 이번엔 장사를 공친 재환이가 스며듭니다.
서로 말이 없고 사는 세상.
여름 소나기에도 잘 견딘 풀꽃 내음 한 번 쓱 맞더니 그 곁에 앉아 무언가를 꾹꾹 새깁니다. 재환이는 어떻게 시를 쓰게 되었을까요? 90년대 중반 어느 겨울 녀석은 새 발자국을 보더니 이상한 말을 짓거리기 시작했습니다.
나봐. 마치 그
같아.
그림 같아?
이 세상 무슨 가사고 다 고향을 찾아서 가는 거야. 대박에
이게 뭐야?
천.
어?
하늘천.
하늘천?
가끔 넓은 세상을 보고 싶다고 이걸 써놨지.
네가 쓴 시냐?
아니지.
그러면?
그냥 만들어 본 말했지.
엉뚱한 말을 툭 내뱉는 것 같은데 이상하게 폼이 나 보였습니다.
꼭 재환이 같다.
맞다. 나를 그렸다. 저 그리고 지랄 같은 나를 그렸다.
재환인 그날 시를 쓰고 싶다고 처음 말했습니다. 그땐 그냥 흘러들었는데 녀석이 뿜어내는 말들이 예사롭지 않다는 생각을 하게 되었습니다.
내 별명은 니크 진정이다. 이 사단이는 야곱의 사단이다. 하나님이 나 같은 놈 관심 가져줄 거야. 가져줄 수 있겠지. 이 길은 나밖에 모르겠다. 여기 오면 수많은 분들이 날 반겨줘. 반갑다고. 여기 지날 때 봤다. 기도했었어. 시인이 되게 달라고.
왜 시인이 되고 싶었어?
대오래 꿈이지. 나도 시인이 될 수 있을까?
그날 재환이는 정말 시인이 되고 싶다고 처음으로 고백했습니다.
멀리 멀리 갔더니 저기 고고 왜 저집 멀리 갔더니 슬프고 또 외로워.
아버지, 재환이에게 정말 관심이 있으시다면 시를 열어주세요. 그날 촬영을 하며 그렇게 기도했습니다.
주의 팔이다. 자, 함께 성령이 계시네. 할렐루야. 함께 하시네.
이게 웬일입니까? 떠돌이 들게 일그러진 로버트 드니로의 얼굴이 너무나 편하고 밝아졌습니다. 무엇이 이렇게 재환이를 갑자기 변하게 만든 것일까요? 재환, 어딨어? 오, 재환이 집에 오랜만에 오네. 어? 우와, 우와, 너무 바뀌었다. 옛날에 와보고. 야, 여기 있던 옛날에 그 비키니 아가씨 사진 다 떼버렸네. 오, 아니 어떻게 이렇게 싹 그 띄워버렸어 그 아가씨를?
그날 기도 받고 뒤에 갑자기 꼬리 보기 싫어졌더라고.
아니 그 사진이? 아니, 무슨 일이 일어난 거야?
내 아래 성령이 오셨어.
오.
그냥 말씀으로 치료해 주셨지.
아, 그래?
담배도 그 냄새 두칠해서 완전히 끝장내버렸다.
담배를 끊어버렸어? 정말이야 그게? 내 동생 이 니코틴정이 담배를 끊다니 정말 기적이 일어났습니다. 성령께서 나라니. 오, 이 시가 완전히 바뀌었네. 예전의 그 시들이 아닙니다. 성령이 오시면 담배 온통 성령님에 대한 하나님의 사랑에 대한 시들 뿐입니다. 어떻게 이런 일들이 가능해진 것일까요? 40이 넘으면서 재환이는 몸이 낫기를 바라고 결혼도 무척이나 하고 싶어 했습니다.
하나님은 전능한 분이지.
그렇지. 전능하십니다.
나도 다 할 수 있을까? 나도 고쳐주실까? 다 몸이 나면 결혼도 있고 아이들 낳고 있고 여러 가지 할 수 있을까? 하나님은 고쳐주실 거야.
어느 날 작은 치유 집회에 재환이와 함께 갔습니다. 뒤틀리고 서러운 재환이의 그 몸이 주님의 능력으로 치유되기를 간절히 기도했습니다.
이 아들을 통해서 이 아들의 욕심과 이 아들의 혼을 포기하는 만큼 주님께서 이 아들에게 영광을 나타나 주시옵소서. 하나님의 영광을 나타나게 하여 주옵소서. 수건을 벗은 얼굴로 거울을 볼 때에 자신의 추한 얼굴을 보는 것이 아니라 하나님의 형상을 보는 아들 되게 하시고 내 모든 상처를 치유할 것이며 땅을 기업으로 준 것으로 글로리 존 영광의 지역, 영광의 영역을 너에게 줄 것이며 갑절의 기름 부으시고 임하시 없소서. 임하시 없소서. 임하시 없소서.
허무한 시절 지날 때 깊은 한숨 내쉴 때 그런 풍경 보시며 단식하는
그 후부터 재환이는 놀랍게 변했습니다.
내 글로리도 전 성령님의 놀라운 역사를 실감하게 되었습니다. 하나님 깃털이가 야곱의 산타 깃털이가 되게 주시오. 하나님께서 여기 지나가는 모든 사람마다 축복하시고 만나 주소서. 오직 영광 임하게 하소서. 예수님의 받들어 기도하였습니다. 아멘. 자, 기쁘다.
어디 숨어 있었는지 애교가 장렬하네요.
첫째가 아버지 감사해요.
시들도 밝고 더 편해졌습니다. 독일의 마리아 자매에서 손님들이 찾아왔습니다. 흥분한 재환이는 자기 시집을 선물합니다.
감사합니다. 야, 감사합니다.
This is
very precious for me.
Ja,
Oh, wie schön. Ja, aber
아버지의 마음을 받아 전해줍니다.
얼마 동안 친구 20년, 야,
so ist der Herr.
야,
Oh,
주님께서 이렇게 하셨어요.
if I hear such testimonies, then I love Jesus more than ever before. Life, your heart,
예,
your
하나님께서
being.
얼마나 사랑하시는지 보여주고 싶대요. 예. 예.
Amen.
아멘.
Amen. I think you have a special part in the suffering of the Lord, and this is a great grace, you know.
네, 그것은 아주 은혜예요. 은혜입니다.
So many people, they have no understanding of
많은
this,
사람들이 이것을 이해하지 못하는데, 예,
but the Lord knows,
예, 하나님께서 주님께서 아십니다.
and you will reap a great harvest in heaven.
형제님은 천국에서 큰 추수를 열매를 얻으실 거예요.
Amen.
아멘.
Much more than many others.
다른 어떤 사람보다도 많은 추수를 천국에서 얻으실 겁니다.
This is the truth. Yeah, amen.
아멘. 예.
Yeah.
야. 예, 감사합니다. 너무 감사합니다. 예.
갑자기 미국에서 재환이를 찾아온 손님이 있었습니다. 제이슨은 캘리포니아에 사는 유대인 목사입니다. 어?
기대들에서 기대.
아, 유대인이라서 기대했는데 정말 왔어? 와. 뭐 또 뭐야?
이거.
우와. 아, 이거 읽어주래.
When the day the Zion singing, we can see the face of
이
Jesus.
작은 땅에서 하루도 쉼 없이 시온의 회복, 하나님의 나라를 기도한 그 시를 선물합니다.
Zion, please sing.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's wonderful.
So special.
재원아. 여기 뭐 하고 있어? 응? 아, 시 쓰고 있었어?
야, 이거 찍어봐.
뭘 찍으라고?
이거.
오, 이 풀? 네가 감독이냐?
내가 감독이다.
아이, 진짜 옛날. 아직도 감독이야?
아니지, 네가 감독이지.
오, 겸손해졌는데 이제는. 얼어붙은 땅에서 작은 풀잎만. 우와. 이
모든 생명은 다 빛을 따라가더라.
아, 그걸 쓴 거야? 빛이 그게 누구야?
예수님이지.
오, 그래?
불의 궁극적인 목적은 예수님이야.
예수님을 따라가는 거야? 우와.
예수님의 여정을 그대로 밟고 가는 거야.
아이고, 이 추운데 어김없이 나와 있냐?
지금 나타. 지금 개시했다.
개시했어? 아이고, 좋아?
할렐루야다.
할렐루야야? 이야.
그래도 하나님께서 널 버리지 않는다.
안 버리셨어?
하나님 아버지가 사랑입니다. 저를 나오게 주셨다 감사드립니다. 기춘대 역사하여
굽은 손으로 꾹꾹 눌러 시를 쓰는 재환이를 촬영했습니다. 가슴이 미어지고 눈물이 나오려고 하는 것을 참았습니다.
내가
내가 죽지 않고 살아서 여호와 하신 일을 내가 죽지 않고 살아서 여호와 하신 일을
나의 모든 삶과 노래로 주께서 하신 일을 선포하리라.
이것이 재환이의 기도야?
내 기도도 되고 너 기도도 돼.
나의 기도도 돼? 우리의 기도네?
우리 모두의 기도도 되고.
그래?
Love sent from heaven to save such a sinner like me, sent to die, bearing the shame of the sins of the world. Love's pure sacrifice, Jesus. Hallelujah to the God of our salvation. I sing Hosanna to the Savior of my soul. Jesus, let earth and heaven now exalt His holy name. He is Lord, the King of love, the first, the last, the risen one. Hallelujah to the King of all creation. Praise and honor to the risen Son of Man, Jesus. Let earth and heaven now exalt His holy name. He is Lord, the King of love, the first, the last, the risen one. 사랑 없이 말할 수 있으랴. 나 같은 죄인 살리며 십자가에서 죽으시오네 예수. 할렐루야 구원의 주 하나님. 예수 하늘과 땅 주의 성을 높이네. 그는 주 사랑의 왕 나의 예수 구원의 주. Give him glory, give him honor, give him praise. Lift up the name of Jesus in this place. Let all creation praise him, glorify him. Let every nation seek his